Hey everyone, Claire Fluffle here for yet another copyability spotlight. I know we're all really excited for this one, but before we tire out these jokes, let's get this video a rocket start by giving it a like and ringing the notification bell after subscribing to be notified whenever I upload. Sounds like fun! And triple don't forget. I would say to double don't forget, but that would be a double negative. Oh no. To leave a comment voting for the next copyability spotlight. Voting ends on March 14th, 2023, so if you're watching this after that date, or you want to leave next month's winner to chance, let me know instead what you think about Wheel. Do you like it? Not like it? Annoyed at the puns, but are you still watching to support me? Aw, you're just so nice. I'd make another pun for the funnies, but Wheel's moveset doesn't actually leave much room for pun variety, so, let's get started instead. So I'm sure a lot of us were expecting to see Wing here, considering Return to Dreamland Deluxe just came out, but Wheel's been getting votes for a long time as well. Even longer than Wing from what I can remember. And to be honest, given that we talk about going fast, I'm surprised Wheel hasn't won sooner. Not to give away if it's good or bad, but kind of the whole point of a wheel is to go vroom, right? You know, vroom, vroom. You know, vroom, 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 as in going fast. Regardless, it's time to see if Kirby uses some grade A tires, or was one of those wheels that caused trouble for race car drivers. Okay, honestly, I know so little about cars and racing and NASCAR. There's like the Lightning McQueen, ka-chow! But I can tell you if Wheel was good or bad. So, let's find out. To start out, it's impossible to rank Dream Buffet since, unlike every other game in the series, you can't consistently speedrun it. Now, don't get me wrong, anyone who's actually played Dream Buffet will probably tell you good things about Wheel, and I do try to cover as many styles of play in these videos as I possibly can. Like for Kirby Fighters, I look at tier lists for multiplayer, or for the main series games, I look at the boss rushes. But there is always a focus on speedrunning, and unfortunately, the game is not Speed Buffet, it's Dream Buffet. That was corny, but Dream Buffet is really good. More people should be playing it. And if you are playing it, use Wheel. I'd argue that Burning is better, because of course it is. But at the very least, I think Wheel is top 3. Again, I think. Number 11. So, I did the thing, right, where I said, I'm not saying Wheel is good or bad, but, I mean, come on, it's Wheel. It just has to be good in every game it's in, right? Or, at the very least, kinda serviceable? And turns out, no, Wheel is actually kinda sorta one of the worst abilities in Planet Robobot. It's not the bottom of the barrel or anything, but it really can't do much of anything. For all of any percent, 100%, and all code cubes, it's got nothing to do. Jet and Fire are the two bests of the bests, while other abilities like Hammer, Ice, and Cutter all have their niches that allow them to see good use in these categories. Robobot any percent is honestly pretty varied too, and still the only time that Wheel shows up is for the forced Wheel Robobot levels. They're tons of fun, don't get me wrong, but it is pretty bad that the only time that Wheel is worth using is when you're forced to. Even worse is how Wheel performs against bosses. Good grief! It ranks 4th from the bottom overall, and while the reasons are very similar to another game we'll wind up talking about later, pretty obvious which one, I know, it's far worse here, since the best abilities are so insanely good, and bosses in general have such beefy health bars. You want to be able to kill bosses quick, and Wheel can't do that. Again, it's not quite bottom of the barrel, although this time it's actually pretty close to it. While its movement for the regular levels, definitely acceptable, it can't keep up with how absurdly good abilities got in Planet Robobot. Yeah, I know, I'm surprised too that Wheel has a bad appearance. It doesn't feel right. Number 10. Aw, now this one's tragic. Wheel legitimately has some important niches in Kirby Air Ride, like how quickly it can zoom through Checker Nights, or how it can be usable in a stadium event like Drag Race for backups. But the problem with Wheel and Air Ride is, well, the air rides. Stars in this game do not mix well with Wheel. If we look at Air Ride all tracks, for instance, the Rocket Star is used for magma flows, and the wheelie scooter is used for the rest. Due to a glitch where wheelie scooter spitting into a wall at a certain angle gives it insane levels of speed. I'm not joking, by the way, Air Ride is super wild, and that Rocket Star has insanely high speeds when used right. Wheel doesn't have anything to do. We get to see it used in Checker Nights for the same reason I mentioned before, being able to zoom fast, but that's about the extent of what it can do. As for City Trial, that mode is much more planned out. Not that Air Ride isn't routed or tricky to pull off or anything, but City Trial, taking place in the city, has a lot more exacts that need to happen. Relying on finding Wheel and using it for its own unique properties is unreliable at best. Definitely possible, but not needed when the stars can mostly function on their own, and abilities like Sword and Needle, or items like the Gordos and the Firecracker, can handle everything just fine. The only mode where Wheel really stands out, kinda, is Air Ride all tracks, all vehicles, since it can patch up some of the bad stars. But not only is that category super niche, an amazing niche, I love this category, it's so cool, but too small to consider for a video like this. You also have other options that can help you out, like Wing or something. I still wouldn't say that Wheel is bad, but certainly I would not call it good. And number 9. You'd think that Wheel in Kirby's Dream Course would be really, really good, since it's fast, plows through enemies, and doesn't care about terrain. And all of those are totally correct points. Unfortunately, Wheel still has some things holding it back. Namely, it's in a game where keeping your ability is really hard, and it's outclassed. Generally speaking, Burning Tornado and UFO are better for movement, while abilities like Stone and Needle are fantastic, specifically for the speedrun, to help avoid those pesky hole-in-one animations. Other abilities still, like High Jump and Parasol, have utility for positioning. Wheel falls in line with the likes of Burning and Tornado, where it's great for movement, but it's far more limited compared to what the two of them can pull off. You're still going to use it if you can. Unlike Robobot, it's definitely not bad here, and you are going to be using it, unlike Air Ride, but unlike a lot of the other abilities in Dream Course, it can feel a little bit limiting. A lot of these same issues apply to how it performs for hole-in-ones, although, thankfully, the issue of availability is slightly lessened, since generally speaking, we're looking at hole-in-ones in kind of a vacuum, instead of looking at as an entire course. At the end of the day, Wheel definitely isn't bad in Dream Course, but it's only okay. Number 8! Alright, so obviously, this video, pretty heckin' long, right? So, I will make this one quick. True or false, Kirby's Adventure has copy abilities. Time up. If you answer true, that's wrong. It has copy ability, singular, and that is Tornado. Now, obviously, that's a bit of a stretch. Only a bit. But Wheel really struggles to do much of anything in a game with Adventure Tornado. On its own, it's actually pretty good, and if a no major glitches any % no tornado run existed, yeah, I'm sure Wheel could find something to do. Since it can't, though, we spin and zoom instead of vroom. Oh well. Number 7! Alright, now we're finally getting somewhere, and it's still bad for the True Arena. Funnily enough, it's actually still 4th from the bottom, the exact same spot as it had in Planet Robobot. Funny how things work sometimes. Anyway, it's slightly better here since there aren't as many abilities to contend with, but the downside is that TDX bosses love spending time in the background. If you can't quick kill them, you are going to lose a lot of time. Thankfully, Wheel isn't the only one that's unable to quick kill a lot of these bosses, so it's not the only one losing a lot of time. It doesn't sting quite as hard as Planet Robobot does. Which is also kind of the reason why it's higher here. You gotta work with me, guys. When we get to the actual meat and potatoes of Triple Deluxe, though, things start to look a lot better. Wheel's early game actually doesn't exist, and it winds up not having much to do for the end game outside of a 100% category where you use it for 6-7, but its mid game is straight up fantastic. It's used to collect some sunstones, which is valuable in its own way, but if it's used for a sunstone and then abandoned, kind of hard to say an ability would be good there, you know? You want more substance out of your abilities in a speedrun. But not only is it also used in any % where you can legitimately pick and choose your sunstones, but it sees use after you get your sunstone too. And it's not just out of technicality either. Wheel may be slower than it was in older games, but if you hold down and then release, Wheel uses rocket start. Yeah, I know, the pun at the start of the video. Making a lot more sense now, doesn't it? And even goes faster than it did in previous games. Combine that with a jump. The move is just called Sky Wheel. I guess that's another fun fact that you know. I really can't work with Sky Wheel. I'm sorry, okay? Wheel goes crazy distances, crazy fast. It can only be used on the ground, which is a bit too limiting for it to be amazing, but it proves to be really useful for most of Worlds 4 and 5, Wild World and Endless Explosions both. World 5 gets a special mention here, as Wheel also gets used to vroom over water, saving a ton of time you'd otherwise have to spend bloop bloop blooping in the floating pools of water. Yeah, don't think about it. Thinking about Kirby rationally gets you nothing but a headache. But using Wheel in Triple Deluxe, that can get you pretty good results if used at the right place at the right time. Number 6! Now we're really starting to talk! Canvas Curse is a great time, and Wheel is also a great time in this great time. Abilities in Canvas Curse, unfortunately, all do share one common problem. They go poof after you finish a level. Speedruns reset at the end of every level anyway, but even if they didn't, you'd still lose your ability as soon as you exit a level. That means while abilities are definitely still useful, they're only useful in designated areas. We're back to that whole availability argument again. I know that's a fun one. Because of this, Wheel technically isn't the best ability. There is definitely an argument to be made on which is better between Wheel and Burning, but of all things, Normal is actually pretty handily the best ability in Canvas Curse. Weird, right? But as for Wheel, the facts, they speak for themselves. You get Wheel, your perk is that you move fast. Tricky to use, incredible once mastered. The perks of Burning are a much faster startup, there is far less ink consumption, and the air doesn't slow it down all that much. But what Wheel does have is a much better ground movement, and as long as you can keep Wheel on the ink, as is to say, on the ground, it won't slow down. That's a tough challenge sometimes, but still it's very much doable. Overall, while Wheel isn't the best in Canvas Curse, it could technically be the best, if you don't count Normal, that is. It could also kinda still be worse than Burning, I think it is, but it's still one of the few abilities in Canvas Curse legitimately worth using. Number 5! For Spotlight veterans, there are some things about these videos that you get used to hearing after a while. Tornado is the best ability in Adventure. Robobot changed how bosses take damage, you know, the goods. One of my favorite things to talk about easily, though, is how broken of a game Kirby Superstar is. So what do I have to say about Wheel? Nothing really. It's honestly not that good. Abilities like Jet and Wing are faster. Plasma way outdamages it. It's kind of worse than it is in Planet Robobot, even. Oh. Well, then why is your rank so heckin' high? Well, there is one reason, and that reason is Wheelie Rider. If you take your totally average ability and turn it into a helper, you've created a monster. Wheelie Rider is insanely fast, and combined with the fantastic jump, you can just vroom and zoom through huge chunks of the entire game with it. Jet is generally preferred due to being better in the air, so you don't really see it in Milky Way Wishes or Revenge of Mennonite or stuff like that, but in Great Cave, any percent is literally nothing but Wheelie Rider dominance. If you're a fan of Wheel, it is required that you watch any percent Great Cave Offensive in the original Superstar. You can watch Hundo too, but it isn't used until Area 3. Once you're there, you keep it for the rest of the run, so it's fine in that regard. But if you really like Wheel, Kirby Superstar, any percent, Great Cave Offensive, go! And then come back here because I need more watch time. But wait, someone shouts. Or maybe they use their indoor voice, I don't know. How does Wheelie Rider deal with bosses? So far, Wheel's been absolutely terrible against them. Wouldn't the same apply here, especially since abilities like Hammer and Plasma exist? That is a really good question. Normally I use that formatting for irony's sake. Good job, metaphorical scapegoat I like to make up on the fly. The answer to your question is twofold. First, since Wheelie Rider is a helper, you're welcome to use another ability just for bosses, and during their moments of overdramatic dying, you can just hop back on the Wheelie Rider and you're good to go. That's not really a perk of Wheel though, now is it? For that, all you need to do is plug in a second controller to get Wheelie Rider's super secret attack, firing star shots. Sounds kind of lame, right? And then you see the damage. Yeah. With all of this in mind, it's easy to say that Wheel in Kirby Superstar is great. It being limited to Great Cave for true dominance does hold it back from being incredible, but it's still the only ability used for an entire any percent portion of the game, which absolutely that counts for something. But how does Wheel hold up in the remake, I wonder? Oh, number 4. Okay, so this is actually going to sound really weird, but hear me out. Wheel, or Wheelie Rider rather, is used for a collective minute or so and a full 100% playthrough of Kirby Superstar Ultra. It's currently never used in Beat ROTK, the any percent equivalent of Superstar Ultra. Its time in Helper to Hero is second from the bottom, which is even worse than the dazzlingly consistent fourth from the bottom it would eventually get in TDX and KPR. This sounds like it would be absolutely awful, and while some of this being overblown due to just kind of being outclassed and is honestly really actually kind of a good ability, is still being outclassed by the end of the day. Plus, second from the bottom in Helper to Hero, that's really hard to argue against. So why is it this high? Well, for that, let's take a brief little detour, go on a drive, so to speak, and take a peek at one of the most infamously powerful abilities in Kirby history, Hammer. Arguably, Hammer is at its absolute best in KSSU. While it's gotten better in later installments, compared to the abilities in its own game, Hammer absolutely annihilates everything in its path so hard, the gap between it and the number 2 is kinda sorta much wider here, comparatively. Wheel and Wheelie Rider by extension honestly have no shot at beating Hammer, thinking conventionally. If you have another DS around though, suddenly not looking so good for Hammer now, is it? The star shots from Superstar are somehow even more insane in Ultra, but to put things into perspective, let's take a look at the True Arena. While ability solos don't exist in the traditional sense for these, aside from some shenanigans with Mike, both one-player Hammer and one-player 2 controller Wheelie Rider are basically ability solos. Hammer barely sneaks under 3 minutes with a 2-minute and 56-second run. Very impressive for sure. But Wheelie Rider saves almost 25 seconds on that with a 2-minute and 32-second world record. And the scary part, one player 2 controller, it's not even all that developed. It's only got 2 runs submitted on speedrun.com compared to the 98 for the regular True Arena. Wheelie Rider has so much more potential than Hammer to get better. And while the bad things about Wheelie Rider and Wheel in Superstar Ultra are hard to ignore, Hammer is the de facto best ability in the series for taking out bosses. And it's very hard to argue that KSSU is anything but top 2 best versions of Hammer, so for it to be so cleanly beaten, and easily beaten as a matter of fact, is insane. Wheelie Rider even removes some RNG from the run, since the Mike shenanigans that Hammer is kinda required to waste on the Wheelie boss can be used on Lololo and Lalala instead. And for those of you who don't know, Lololo and Lalala, RNG determines where they spawn, so not having to worry about that as much. Hello! And who knows, maybe some random innovations will come through for the main game, or Helper to Hero, to see Wheelie Rider soar. Who knows? That's part of the fun thing about speedrunning, right? Number 3. The astute viewers have probably noticed that the only games left are the ARCA/flagship games. The same viewers probably also knew that these 3 would be at the top from the very start. It's pretty nuts. It's hard to argue that Wheel isn't the best in any of these games, and to be frank, I'm not that much of a nutcase. By far, Wheel is the best ability in all 3 of these games, and it doesn't come down to which Wheel is best, as much as which Wheel destroys the game the hardest. And in that very specific regard, Wheel in Nightmare in Dreamland is pretty easily 3rd place. Don't let that fool you though, Wheel is much better here compared to Adventure. Mostly because Tornado's kinda bad now, sure, but it could still be worse than, say, Burning, or High Jump, or Sword, or Spark, or Ball. All of those are great abilities that see plenty of use in any percent. Yes, Ball is OP in this game, see that spotlight to find out why, but why are they all worse than Wheel? Thankfully, it's easy to explain, so I'll try to keep it brief. Outside of Butter Building, Kirby's Adventure, thus Nightmare in Dreamland as well, have pretty basic and horizontal levels. Wheel mostly struggles in the air, and even that's been toned down in the flagship games compared to the others. It also struggles to kill bosses, which is where a lot of the other abilities come in to try and steal Wheel's thunder. But if your varied speedrun is split into what is Wheel good at and what can other abilities do to help, then yeah, I think that results in Wheel being pretty amazing. Burning comes close, and there are some days where I'm considering that to be the better ability, but today, that's not one of those days. Wheel is anything but a nightmare in Nightmare. Alright, I know that was really corny, but with the next 2 games coming up, there is no way that you can stop watching now. Things are about to get pretty insane. Number 2. Yeah, once we got to Superstar, the rest of this list just kind of became really obvious. Unlike a Nightmare, Wheel is pretty handily the best ability in Amazing Mirror, and again, it's not particularly close, but compared to what the next game does, it is still missing some things. It doesn't literally do everything, you know? But what you need an ability to do in Amazing Mirror, Wheel does in Amazing Mirror. It's fast, it's actually good in the air finally, you can jump while you use it, it has solid availability, the only hard mix setup required for it happens like 30 seconds into a run so nobody cares. It's arguably even better in Hundo than any %, since that's a longer category and you use Wheel for longer. So when talking about it, where do you even start? I'm choosing to start interesting here. Amazing Mirror any % is a category that, while very Wheel heavy, sees decent variety. A missile, stone, parasol, sword, a few different abilities get legitimate use, while some other fun options are usable as backups, like Cutter against the Mega Titan. The reason why Amazing Mirror is even able to be such an interesting any % in the first place, however, is because of Wheel. But, how? While you're allowed creative freedom with the order you tackle things in Amazing Mirror, both casually and for speedrunning, runners have an optimized early game that basically requires the first 3 worlds visited to be in a set order. These are also very dominated by Wheel, but since a large portion of the early game is hitting the optimal switches for portals later on, this results in something interesting. It turns out that you don't need Wheel for every single part of the game. You can make do with starting Wheel and ditching it for something else later on, or just not bringing it at all if that's what the game calls for. The free-form, open-world nature of Amazing Mirror, as well as the routing that Wheel allows, opens up legitimate creativity with how runners play the game. It's one of the things that make any % such a blast, and it's all spearheaded by Wheel. Of course, one of the first portals you unlock takes you right to Wheel, so it isn't like Wheel just disappears and becomes irrelevant. It's the best ability in the game for a reason and all. But basically, other abilities are allowed to see use because Wheel is so good. That's really fascinating to me, and definitely cements Amazing Mirror Wheel as the number 2. And it's painfully obvious what the number 1 is, so let's just get to that. Number 1, Kirby Squeak Squad. Wheel and Squeak Squad is pretty good. It kills bosses, it zooms through levels, it can high jump, it plows through regular enemies. It does everything that you would want it to do in both any % and Hundo. Specifically, and unsurprisingly, any % is literally all about getting Wheel and finding every opportunity that you can to keep it. The footage in the background genuinely speaks for itself, but if you aren't watching the video, well, you should be. But what about 100%? Yeah, still pretty absurd there. You use it less than you actually need other abilities to do things, but it's still overwhelmingly Wheel dominated. Honestly, I've talked about Wheel in so many other spotlights, so instead of going into specifics, I'm just gonna explain how the tech works, and then you can kind of put the pieces together from previous spotlights. And if you haven't watched those, playlist. To perform this insanely good Wheel high jump, all you need to do is hold the jump button, and while Kirby's rising up, hit the B button and you will start using Wheel. It's not hard, it's insanely good, and you can pull off some crazy maneuvers with it. I call it the high jump, but genuinely, it's better than high jump. How does that work? Wheel, of all things, just a tire being better at high jump than high jump? I don't know, but if any ability can do it, it's Squeak Squad Wheel, alright! While you can definitely use other abilities to deal with the boss fights, Wheel is still really good against them. Similar to Amazing Mirror, whenever you get a hit on a boss, it registers that hit, and then immediately goes into the next hit. Think about how Triple Deluxe bosses take damage prior to Planet Robobot, and that's what we're talking about here. Again, you're not using Wheel for every single one of them, just because it's just inconvenient in some cases. But, thanks to the bottom screen, you can pretty much just get Wheel back whenever you want. So even if you aren't using Wheel for a boss fight, it's not like it's gone for very long. Yep, here is another example of an ability abusing the fact that game mechanics exist to make it even better than everything else. Yowza. Oh, speaking of boss fights though, Squeak Squad actually kind of has this thing where invincibility candy is the best ability to use against bosses, which might sound a little weird, like, oh, why would you use candy against the boss when that's not something you can really use against most bosses? And that is because, once again, the bottom screen. But to be specific, there is a glitch, I guess that you could call it, where if you inhale a bubble and then select an ability on the bottom screen, you keep the ability that you inhaled from the bubble. You mostly use this to keep wheel, like, a lot, but you can also use it to get duplicate candies, which is just absolutely absurd. But I mean, come on, candies can't be that easy to get, right? You would be correct if candy wasn't on the mix roulette, which it is. So all you need to do is mix for candy on the bottom screen. Voila, you just get to keep wheel ability broken. Jeez, I feel like I'm forgetting something. There's candy mix for bosses. There's generally being good for bosses. There's the high jump. Oh, that's right. I did forget one. This one's super advanced, so you might want to keep your ears open, all right? You hit the B button and wheel moves fast. Yeah, I know. Putting your DS down and watching wheel destroy everything on the screen sounds a bit tricky, but I'm telling you, next time you play Squeak Squad, you should try that. It's really good. Just confirm it real quick. I didn't say this outright, but Squeak Squad wheel, absolutely the best ability in the game. Definitely the best wheel has ever been. And there we go! Finally, another speedrunning sensation of an ability has been covered. So was wheel any good over the years? Let me reword that. So just how good was wheel over the years? Obviously, it's been great in so many games, but it's kind of easy to forget that there are some genuine stinkers here. An ability like Wing, for example, doesn't have these low points. And even some that do, like Fire and Hammer, are never really that bad. Typically, they're just outclassed, but they still have their niches. When Wheel is outclassed, it's just kind of bad, actually. So is Wheel actually amazing? I would argue yes, but only because of Squeak Squad. Squeak Squad Wheel could very well be even better than something like Return to Dreamland Wing or Adventure Tornado. It's impossible to put into words just how good Wheel is in Squeak Squad, because it literally does everything that you need it to. But that's not to sell its other accomplishments short. It triumphs over Hammer at its own game in Superstar Ultra, it carries other abilities to success in Amazing Mirror, and is even held back by game mechanics sometimes, like in Canvas Curse, and still manages to turn out great. Wheel is a speedrunning staple for a reason, and while it's seen better days, or at least as of recent, its impact can't be denied. And there you go, Spotlight over. These are always fun. Thank you all so much again for watching to the very end, and I really hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to vote for the next Spotlight if you're watching before March 14th, 2023. And if you're not, well, you can still tell me what you thought about Wheel's insanity. I certainly didn't think it would have any bad games that it was in, especially ones as bad as Robobots, but my own surprise is part of what makes these so much fun to make. But I've been rambling for too long now. I really want to get that video watch time up. Haha. I've been Claire. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all around. Bye!